Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks. This morning we have Dr. Cesar Izaurralde. Cesar actually is a K-State graduate. He got his PhD here. None of you would know Dave Kissel. So a while back, a few years back, right, Cesar?
Yeah.
I don't remember the sequence, but he worked in Canada in the Western Prairies for a while, also with Pacific Northwest National Labs, which is based in Richland, Washington, but they also have offices in Washington, D.C. area and Ohio, right?
Well, Battelle is the organization that manages the Pacific National Lab, and we had joined. We had developed a joint collaboration with the University of Maryland to form the so-called GCRI, or Joint Global Change Research Institute, which is located in College Park.
The National Labs, Pacific Northwest National Labs is run as DOE, Department of Energy. And so then he retired from that and then been adjunct or a professor at University of Maryland. And as Cesar mentioned, that basically he's been looking at, well, he's done previous work on nitrogen cycling in soils, carbon cycling, and then really looking at climate change now. And effects on soils and plants, crops, mostly in the modeling side of things in the last 20 years or so or more. But Cesar is heading up the modeling group for our RAIN project. And I think he's gonna probably get an idea of what his group is doing on the modeling side. Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you for the introduction, Chuck. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. And I don't get to see too many faces now with this Zoom because I'm looking at the first screen of the presentation. Okay, you see the title is about modeling productivity and resource use efficiency and soil health in the RAIN project. And I'd like to acknowledge, my colleagues, Prasad Bandaru and Curtis Jones, who are part of the RAIN project as well. And the three of us are in the Department of Geographical Sciences at the University of Maryland. You know, I would hate to say that, we are unique in the sense that, that we're modelers and so on, because I believe that all of us who conduct experiments in a way, we are modelers, and we are able to formulate models in our minds or in paper, and just to try to get an understanding of how things work. And we conduct experiments to see if the hypothesis is the model that we had, as simple as possible, is working in the right direction, or in the direction that we expect it to be. So that's a bit of an expansion of the idea of or the concept of being a modeler. The objectives today is just, I have three objectives in mind. Is just to make a description of the goals and the objectives of the NIFA RAIN project. And I'd like to make a few definitions of agricultural models. Last year or the year before, I guess in 2019, I made a longer presentation on agricultural models in Argentina. But for the sake of concentrating more on the RAIN project, I'm just going to pass by very quickly on that. And then go and show you examples of things we are doing in the project in terms of modeling yield and trying to develop parameters for novel crops, evaluate efficiency in the use of water and nitrogen primarily, and also try to capture the evolution of soil health parameters, dynamics. We tend to think, or some people think, that maybe soil is something that is rather static, but it actually is quite alive. And by the way we manage the soils, we are going to change some of the properties. So I'm going to mention something about that as well. I don't promise too many results because we're just into the second year of the project, but hopefully in the next few years, we'll start to see more results. This is just one slide of the project. Perhaps you've seen that in terms of what the major problem that we have in the Southern Air Plains, which is the main activities that dry land, from the point of view of agriculture, is dry land agricultural production. But the yields have been stagnant for some time, and the productivity is low because the efficiency, the use of resources, primarily water and nutrients, is not that great. And also, in addition to that, climate variability is one of the major factors imposing, the question of climatic change as well. So the goal for the project is to try to generate and disseminate knowledge that leads to a substantial increase in the productivity and resource use efficiency and soil health in the Southern Air Plains. And primarily, very briefly, we have three objectives: is to develop a strategic and tactical management that help us improve diversification and intensification of the production systems. We intend to disseminate the knowledge to farmers and also create educational opportunities. Below you see three maps. On the left, we have the area of study, the Southern Air Plains, and the dots there, the colors show the production region of the winter wheat, which is the primary crop grown in that region. On the middle map shows the variation in precipitation from east to west. East, wetter climate, higher precipitation, and it decreases towards the west, actually the northwest. And then on the right one, I just added one more just to show the soils. The molly soils are the main soils in the prairies. And all these type of molly soils, they have the order is molly soils, but they have suborders, and the oostols, which is the kind of orange color, is the main soil in the study area. Agricultural models. Let me just give you a definition, and I just took it basically briefly to a simple definition of agricultural models. These are algorithms that we construct to attempt to emulate a complex biological environment. And by biological environment, we're talking about the atmosphere, the land processes, and how we manipulate these processes in terms of the land and the impact that these systems may have, or feedbacks may have on the environment as well. Agricultural models have been many decades in the making. We have gone from very simple models, and to the right you see a timeline that goes from the 1950s all the way to the present, and in which some in the 1950s you see the three ovals in red, highlighting the only thing that I'm going to mention about this timeline. One of them is just back in the 50s, is some of the early computational analysis of plant and soil processes. And then going into more to development of crop models. And you can see around the 1980s, we saw tremendous growth of new models appearing, like a series models and the EPIC model and so on, developing in the 1980s. And that was with the advent of the personal computers as well. And then to the right, you see nowadays in present time, complex models being used not only by themselves, but also as an ensemble of models. And the best example that we have for that is the ACMIP project, in which up to 30 models have been used together to try to improve the predictions of crop yields and the different circumstances all over the world. Today, I'm going to talk basically about the models that we're using in the project, which are EPIC and APEX. And I'm going to start basically mentioning or illustrating some of the attributes of the EPIC and APEX models. You believe that you may think that these are two different models. The names respond to acronyms, but I'm not going to mention the meaning of these acronyms. Simply just know that these are the EPIC and APEX models. We can decipher that later. But EPIC is a terrestrial ecosystem model that can run at plot scale, at field scale. When you run in multiple fields, you can apply the model at regional scale and even at global scale. And the APEX model is the EPIC model. It's a bit confusing, but APEX contains the EPIC model at the field scale, but actually you can represent farms and small watersheds using APEX. And I will explain more about APEX later. You see a very simple cartoon exemplifying some of the processes that you can model with EPIC. And below, you have a brief illustration of what we've been doing back in the early 2000s by developing the carbon model in EPIC, by showing how residues added to the soil decompose, and then how the biomass transformed that, and then some of that how it goes into different pools or compartments with different mean residence time. And on the right side, you have illustrations of the various components of these models, biophysical components, such as the atmosphere, plant and soil, and the landscape, biogeochemical processes, such as, for example, water, carbon, and nitrogen, and the management, which is a quite unique thing that, agricultural models have, is the ability to represent what farmers do on the land, to grow crops, to build terraces, to export materials, and so on. And the key aspect there is the formulation and the tracking of the soil quality in terms of how much carbon can be retained in the soil and how that changes with management. Okay. All right. First, modeling at field scale, at plot scale. In the project, we're using plot data from 3 sites, Ashland Bottoms, you know about that. You're very near there. Hutchinson, Kansas, and Reno, Oklahoma. And we use data from these 3 sites to calibrate and validate the EPIC model. And on the right, you see a very recent picture taken by Romulo Lolato, Dr. Lolato, showing the plots at Ashland Bottoms. And where you see the different plots, the different winter wheat and triticale, he told me there was there. I don't know exactly what they are, but you see the plots there, and hopefully I think we'll start using some of the data that is emerging from these experiments. We also hope to be able to model productivity, so-called water use efficiency, and I remember I refer that as being the efficiency use of water by the crop, and the nitrogen use efficiency is the NUE, and perhaps we'll repeat that. And we are going to model different levels of management, such as a baseline, just to be able to compare against, and primarily that's going to be just continuous wheat. Dual purpose, that's just when we include grazing of the winter wheat. Adaptive management, just when you make decisions in the middle of the crop and in growing of the crop. And intensive, when you try to increase the intensity of the cropping by replacing the fallow, the period in which you're not growing anything, with other crops that can provide forage for crops, for animals. Anyway, and also we plan to develop some crop parameters for novel species such as moth and tepari, which are resistant to drought, and make recommendations for in-season N applications. Okay, just an example of the kind of things that we intend to predict with the models is that we go beyond just yields. We also intend to get a variety of environmental outcomes. So on the left side, you have an example of winter wheat yield predictions, and when we compare that's in blue. And then when we compare against results from variety trials, county yields and state yields. And you can see in some cases the simulations get closer to the variety trials, but they're greater overall than the county yields and the state yields. And this is not surprising, but because our models do not perhaps reflect many of the disturbances of the stresses that crops, the real crops may undergo in a given county or a given state. And then on the right side, you see a table in which we have the three sites, Ashland, Hutchinson, and El Reno. And then on the rows, you have different variables that we are getting from the model. We're not paying attention, but you see that they're different across the sites. We have availability in terms of the outcomes, in terms of how much water is transpired, how is the efficiency of the use of water, if there's stress in the use of water, and other variables such as emissions of greenhouse gases such as nitrous oxide, and also changes in carbon. Okay, that's as an example of the type of modeling and the type of results we expect to obtain from the actual experiments. If you have any questions as I'm talking, just please interrupt me and we can try to answer that. Then we go now to the one aspect of modeling that's crucial, because the slide before, I used the best information that we had available for making the runs at these three sites, but it was not exercising in the calibration. And calibration, by that I mean when you adjust certain parameters to optimize the result of the model. And there's a bit of a challenge here because we don't really have too many field experiments. And so we had to rely on these field experiments, and you may have errors in the characterization of on the plot level parameters and the drivers. And as you expand that, the model in its application at regional scale, you also may have some uncertainties that are embedded with the type of calibration that you have performed. And so some time ago, Curtis Jones, who is leading this work, he, in collaboration with Romulo Lolato, he was able to get some result from 6 wheat experiments at 4 locations in Oklahoma, and you see the locations, and they had different rates of application with nitrogen, and they had different variability in terms of the soil, weather, and management. So Curtis used all this information to model the growth of the crops and the dry land conditions, and also under irrigated conditions. Let me explain a bit. The red dots are the measure value and explain how the crops grow from planting to harvesting. And you can see that there is a linear phase at the beginning for all the crops. Then there's an exponential growth And then as the crop reaches maturity, there's no further accumulation in biomass. And then the blue line and the green lines are the simulated values using different types of inputs. As you can see, the model is able to follow the evolution of the crop growth and development. And I was mentioning that calibration also implies that you have to adjust for the parameters. Some of the parameters are very sensitive. When you change one value, you may have a different outcome in what you're expecting. And I don't have it here, but there was a highlight of of the parameters that were more sensitive to change. But basically, the determination was that the soil hydrology parameters were the most sensitive parameters, where it was important to adjust and to optimize for obtaining a good calibration of the model. Okay, there was some animation in these slides. So you can see parameter 1, parameter 12, parameter 2, and so on. Those are the most relevant parameters that you have to pay attention when you calibrate the model. And but also, in addition to have just the calibration of single crops, we also need to understand how to, because the crops don't happen, just one crop all the time, but they're grown in rotations. So, for example, the corn-soybean rotation is a classical rotation in which you have corn 1 year and soybean second year, and so on. So farmers follow that, and thankfully, I think through the effort of USDA and the amount of information that we have from remote sensing, there's a product called a CDL, crop data layer. You have the definition on the right side and where to get that more information, and in which you can, using that information year by year, you can develop what type of rotations farmers are following in the field. And for example, in this case, Curtis extracted about 1,700 unique 3-year rotations from the CDL. And the table below shows some examples of the type of rotations that you're able to detect using the CDL information. That information is available for the entire nation at the continental level at 30-meter resolution. So that information is going to be useful for us to make simulations at the regional scale. Now, the second example of modeling activities is the so-called nitrogen recommendation tool. And this work is being led by Prasad Bandaru. And the idea here is that nitrogen fertilizer is something key to crop production. And also we know that the amount of nitrogen that we apply to crop, it can be all the recommended doses at planting, but also we can split the doses. And the reason for that is just to create or make more efficient use of the nitrogen applied, and to try to reduce the losses of nitrogen. The nitrogen fertilizers perhaps is the most expensive input that we use in crop production. So reducing losses is paramount, it's very important. But the question here, and farmers are using application of nitrogen in split doses, but the question farmers have is how much nitrogen should be applied in early spring. So Prasad is trying to respond to that question by developing a decision support system to make recommendations of end rate application in early spring. So he's using a variety of information different weather databases, climate databases, to make simulations that go for planting to early spring using historical and near real-time weather information. And then at decision time, when it's the present in early March, based on weather forecast and short-term weather forecast, usually they go for 1 or 2 weeks or maybe 1 month at the most. He can continue the simulation using that information, and in that window there, he can make recommendations to how much fertilizer should be applied in early spring. We have done this exercise 2 times in 2020, in the spring of 2020 and 2021 as well. And then you can continue making simulations into the future. You don't know exactly how much it's going to rain for the rest of the growing season, but you can base the outcomes using historical weather, and you can select the years in which perhaps it's been a wet year like in 2000 or a very dry year like in 2003, and you can continue the simulations that way. Now, in terms of the amount of nitrogen to apply to a crop, he's been doing some simulations by simulating incremental rates of nitrogen. As you see, the x-axis is the nitrogen applied to the crop, and the y-axis is the yield. And you can see that very early at very low doses, you see like an exponential growth, and then you see at about up to 60 or 70 kilos per hectare, you can start to see a plateauing of the response of yield to fertilizer application. And after a certain rate, perhaps after 100 or 110, you see that there's no more response. But also the outcomes are quite variable as well, and you can see that the variance in the result is quite large. Now, on the right side, we show the other part, which is very, very important to producers, and that's the return, because farmers are investing nitrogen, money in fertilizer nitrogen, and they want to have a response in terms of what they're getting back. But as you can see, as you increment the nitrogen rate, the returns somehow increase, but up to a certain point, and then suddenly you start to see decreases in the return. So the question then is that the decisions that are taken by farmers will vary with the risk acceptance level and what risk tolerance farmers may have. And if they are more tolerant, perhaps they will choose higher rates because they're willing to tolerate that high availability that they may expect in the response. So this is to be continued. There's already web-based decision support in the making, and I don't think it is available to the public yet. Oh. Okay, so I got stuck there. And this is what the question of assessment of risk tolerance. This is what shows in this slide here on the graphics, and you can see the how the rates vary based on the different tolerance to risk. The different colors there shows the risk sensitivity, and there's 6 classes actually, from 1 to 6 shown in the table on the right. And there's something to evaluate. This is called the criterion function, and that goes from positive values to negative values. So the rate varies from when there's very small risk sensitivity, the rate is larger, but it decreases to 0 when the sensitivity is high. Like number 6 in which the criterion function is minus 60. So anyway, that's an example then of the end recommendation tool. And now a third example. And how am I doing with time, Chuck?
Got about 20 minutes.
Okay, all right.
25 minutes.
All right. And then I mentioned APEX, which is a watershed model. And I also said that APEX contains EPIC, all the EPIC functions at the field scale or at the plot scale. But the unique thing about APIC is that you can simulate these farms as a whole with the rotations, with including animals, and you can have some trees in there as well. And we think that as a farm, we can view the farm as a small watershed composed by fields with different lots or paddocks. And the unique thing that APEX can do is to calculate what happens to some of the flows of certain components of the system. And one of them is water. Water runs off, we all know that. And so the thing is that, with APEX, we can calculate the runoff. And that is shown in the graphics on the right. You see a small watershed that has in the bottom just one common outlet, and then the different fields numbered 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So you can have different uses for each different field. You can implement rotations in there. You can have different type of management. But in the end, all these things are going to be connected through the water runoff. If there is erosion, soil will move from field to field, and so will nutrients as well, and the pesticides. Something is very, very important as well. So we can conduct a whole farm analysis for crop production, resource use efficiency, and net returns. And thanks to the help from Dr. Rice and others, Dr. Auctioneer from Oklahoma, who are working in this farmer-to-farmer network, we are taking information or getting information from these farms that are being in the network to create so-called representative farms in APEX, so we can model farm productivity, biogeochemical cycles, soil erosion, and changes in soil properties at farm scale. By representative farms means that we're not going to model exactly the same fields or the same information that farmers have, but just to create a representation, because we believe that representative farm captures the essence of what might be the production activities of a given region. This concept has been used before, back in the 90s, and so we're taking that from that time and try to implement it here. And our intention is to model scenarios based on the field experiments and farmers' recommendations. And we expect to obtain from the models the information how the soil health parameters may change based on what we model. For example, we expect to see changes in soil organic matter. For example, how much nitrogen mineralization may have in the different fields, how much losses we may have for nitrogen, how water holding capacity, that is the ability of the soil to retain water, can change with management, or whether the soil becomes more or less erodible based on how we manage the land. And hopefully that information is going to be useful for the soil health task. And we know that the model works, is able to make predictions quite dynamic in that sense. When you change organic matter and you gain organic matter, the bulk density changes. the porosity of the soil changes and the water retention changes. And so we would like to see how that is in action. And if we, what we model in Apex is able to capture at least the direction of things that are going to be observed by the experimenters. These are just the location of the farms from Ashland Bottoms and in Colwich, Kansas. And then we have 3 in Oklahoma, in Brahman, Miami, and Hollister in the south. And we're using soil information to generate the all the inputs for running the model, such as, for example, weather, topography, and soils. Thankfully, I think we have very good databases and we can have a good start implementing some of these runs. And these are early results of our simulations. 5-year averages of winter wheat yields in bushels per acre from 2016 to 2020. We don't have simulated anything at 2021, but at least we're quite happy because we're able to simulate roughly the county yield averages for Kansas and Oklahoma, which are about in the 50 bushels per acre range. We have some variability here. Some sites seem to be more productive than others according to these 5-year simulations. Manhattan, for some reason, Manhattan, which is Ashland, doesn't look that productive. Anyway, this is an example of the type of simulations that we can do with both EPIC and Apex. These are done with the Apex model. And then we hope to be able to obtain, with all this information that we obtain from the simulations, we are going to convey or give that information to our ag economist, Dr. Bob Chambers, to calculate total factor productivity. I'm not going to go into much detail, but total factor productivity, it's not a new concept. It's just simply that it's application to farming issues is a bit less known, but it's in industry, in economics, it's used all the time. But basically the definition is just a measure of how much output you get, the aggregate output per unit of aggregate input. And it gives you information of change, and it gives you an indication of if the economy or a certain index is activity is growing or stagnant or being becoming negative. Okay. So this is in the making as well. I don't have any results at the moment, but at least gives you an example of the type of activities that we are doing. And to end, instead of giving you too many words, I thought to summarize is that we expect that the results from the rain experiments and modeling will contribute to improve farm productivity, resource use efficiency, and soil health in the Southern Great Plains. And I thought of illustrating these as with these drawings, in which on the left side we have the current system, things that farmers are doing now, and on the right side the illustration shows the alternative system. It's going to be more productive, and see that you have some flows or some arrows showing precipitation, transpiration, and evaporation. And one of the key things that happens is that we believe that we're not using transpiration. If we can induce more water flux to the atmosphere via transpiration by plants, we can increase productivity that way, because we think that we're using too much through evaporation. If there's a way through management to shift or to increase the size of the green arrow, we are going to have more transpiration and a bit less evaporation. Precipitation may not change that much, but by increasing transpiration, we are going to have a system that's going to be more water use efficient. And we can do things in a different way. For example, we can intensify the crops during the year. Instead of leaving that land fallow, for example, on the left side, we can use some summer forage, and we can have more productivity. Or we can use different rotations to increase productivity, and different grazing system as well. So in all, the system on the right is more productive. And as a result, the soil will reflect that in having more organic matter, as you can see by the intensity of the color of soil organic matter between the left and the right. And the implication of that is that perhaps by having more organic matter, the water holding capacity will increase, and the runoff may decrease, and the drainage perhaps will be the same, but you're having more water in the soil as well. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to try to respond to questions you may have.